Hi everybody, welcome back to the first term of Human Anatomy and Physiology at Clackamas Community College. I'm Christina Wallace, and today we're going to talk about Human Reflex Physiology, exercise 21 in your lab manual, and general sensation, exercise 22 in your lab manual. All right, so here we are at the beginning of your lab report. So I've indicated exercise 21 for your reflexes, exercise 22 for general sensation. And so the exercise 21, we're going to start there first, and that starts at about page 329 in your lab book. It's not a very large chapter. And so here we're just going to be talking about how reflexes work. And so that action that happens when you touch a hot stove and pull your hand away so quickly, that is a reflex. It's not one of the ones that we're going to name in your lab book, but that signal goes from your hand to your spinal cord and doesn't necessarily go up to your brain before you pull your hand away. Touching the hot stove is so dangerous that your spinal cord can get you to pull your hand away before your brain even processes the signal. That's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about reflexes. And then general sensation, you'll see those page numbers down farther when I get to it. General sensation is just basically talking about how our nerves and receptor system works. And so we have receptors kind of closer to the surface of our body in our skin, and then we have receptors in our deep viscera of our body, and that's how we get messages and information, and that's what general sensation is going to talk about. And so here we are at the lab instructions for exercise 21 and 22. And there are some videos for you to watch. So typically, if we were in person in the lab, you would be doing a lot of this lab report together in groups, and you would be testing your fellow students. And so because we can't do that, you're going to be watching videos of these tests, and then you're going to be analyzing some data that we provide you that you would have collected in class. And so you're going to be analyzing some data to try to draw some inferences. And so here in the instructions, we're going to start out with kind of body reflexes. You have a couple of types. I'm going to go over that when I show you the lab report, but I just want to draw your attention to where the videos are. So you have some videos for some somatic reflexes, which I'll describe in a minute. And then you have some videos for autonomic reflexes. And I have color coded those, and you'll see that color coding in your lab report as well. I urge you to do that just to keep which ones are somatic straight from which ones and apart from which ones are autonomic. And so there'll be videos for different types of reflex tests, how you look at them, and then some videos for demonstrations of autonomic reflexes. So there is a pupillary reflex video, and then and that's all the reflex stuff. And then the bottom of the page here, this is where exercise 22 starts on page 6. So 6, 7, and 8 are exercise 22. And you're going to be kind of doing a couple of discrimination tests for cutaneous receptors. And that's the 2-point threshold or the 2-point discrimination test. Same thing. And then a tactile localization test. Both of these videos are under a minute or a minute and a half long. They're very quick, and they're pretty self-explanatory. And then everything else is just kind of analyzing data and answering some questions out of your lab book. And so that's pretty much it for the instructions. All right, so here we are back at your lab report. It's also handy that all of those video links that are in your instructions are also linked in your lab report. So we'll see those. So I just want to talk about the first page a little bit. So we're going to be talking about different kinds of reflexes. And so let me get my, pardon me. I just want my cursor. There we go. And so I highlighted this first question, defining a reflex, because a lot of times people forget to fill out that one. So it's not highlighted for any other special reason. Just remember that you have to define a reflex for me. And then you're going to talk about reflex arcs, and then you're going to be kind of noting the differences between autonomic reflexes and somatic reflexes. And so autonomic things I'm going to talk about in purple ink, and somatic things I'm going to talk about in red ink. And you'll also see this yellow and orange color highlighting as we go on. So autonomic reflexes, actually I'm going to start with somatic. Somatic reflexes, soma means body. Remember, like the soma of a neuron was the body, the cell body of the neuron. So somatic reflexes are on some level going to involve skeletal muscles. So even though it's a reflex, even though it's involuntary and it happens in quick, rapid succession, or it happens quickly, it still involves skeletal muscles. If you hit your knee with a hammer at the doctor's office, your skeletal muscles will make your ankle and your knee kick out a little bit. That's the patellar reflex. And so your gag reflex is also a somatic reflex. You know, if you push your toothbrush too far back in your mouth, you're going to gag. So something that involves skeletal muscles or kind of can be easily seen on the outside, those are more somatic. They're using the somatic nervous system and somatic pathways. Autonomic reflexes are truly involuntary because they involve the smooth muscle, all of the involuntary muscle in your body. So muscle around your blood vessels, controlling your blood pressure and stuff. Muscles around your eyeballs that would involuntarily control turning away from a pain stimulus or something. And then the smooth muscle around your glands, getting your glands to secrete things, is also can be an autonomic reflex. And so just keep those things in mind as we go along. So I just kind of want to talk you through a reflex arc. You're going to have to know all the pieces, parts of this architecture. So on some level, we get a stimulus at our cutaneous membrane or a muscle or something happens on the surface of our body. We get a sensory signal, an afferent signal arriving at the posterior dorsal horn. Then we're going to have an interneuron where something gets processed right here at the spinal cord and doesn't necessarily need to go up to the brain. Then we're going to have an efferent neuron or an exiting motor signal leaving the anterior spinal cord and exiting out. And then we're going to go talk to the effector. So effector is the thing that it shows the effect of the reflex. And so this motor signal is going to come out and tell some muscles or a gland or something what to do. That's a reflex arc. So in your lab report, you'll have to identify all of those 5 parts of the reflex arc. And then down towards the bottom of the page, you're going to list some somatic reflexes. There's 5 types of somatic reflexes. These are just in a small paragraph of text. They're not written out as a list anywhere. So look at the small paragraph of text to find these 5 different types. And then at the bottom, you have a picture of a reflex arc, which I just showed you on the slide, that you have to label. Now we're going to talk through and test some of those somatic reflexes. And so you're going to be watching some videos of these reflexes and then analyzing some data about them. So you have a video here and also in the instructions about the patellar reflex. And so this is the one where you hit your little knee, the tendon below your patella with a hammer, and your knee kicks out, right? So you have a little short video of this to watch. I think it's under 3 minutes, under 2 minutes. But I've also included here a diagram of the patellar reflex. And so you can kind of see the hammer hits the tendon, a stretch receptor in your muscle notices that tendon being stretched, a signal, a sensory afferent signal goes to your dorsal horn, gets processed by a couple different flavors of interneurons. So we're going to have a positive excitatory output, and we're also going to have an inhibitory output. And so this slide kind of talks through that. Then you have some questions to answer about that. And then with these darkened responses here, that's data that you would have collected in the classroom. And so we do this test under 3 different conditions that are kind of spelled out in number 6 right here. And this darker print is telling you what the response was. And so just kind of read through these questions, read through these responses, and then kind of think about, does it help you or hurt you to have other nervous activity going on the same tracks and pathways as the reflex arc? That's kind of what they're trying to get to there. And then, okay, we continue on with some more somatic reflexes. So your Achilles is just the patellar reflex of your ankle. And so there's a video, 1 minute long, shows you the hitting of the Achilles reflex and what happens. Pretty straightforward. Crossed extensor reflex is really kind of fun. I would always demonstrate this one in the class. And this is occurring, crossed is the key word here. So it's kind of like, and there's a nice little 3-minute video here. This is a good video, and it does a good review of the reflex arc. So worthy of your time to watch this. And so crossed extensor, crossed indicates that there's going to be some sort of contralateral behavior indicated. There's going to be something happening on one side of your body, and then the muscles on the other side of your body, the opposite side, are going to react in some way. And so if I came up to you, an attacker came up to you and grabbed your left arm and pulled it, your urge would be to pull your left arm away from the attacker and punch the attacker in the face with your right arm. So your left arm comes close to your body and your right arm goes out to punch the attacker in the face. And that would have been a funny demonstration in the class. And so keep that in mind and then watch the video, and I think it should make everything very clear. Next somatic reflex they talk about are superficial cord reflexes. These are called superficial reflexes in your textbook, so don't let that little word cord trip you up. It just means that they're superficial reflexes that get processed at the spinal cord. And there are 3 that they name in the class. They're really only going to have you talk about one, the plantar reflex, in the lab report. The other 2 are cremasteric and abdominal. And I bring up the cremaster muscle, the cremasteric reflex, because I think a lot of you testes having humans out there are going to understand. Around the scrotum, there is a muscle called the cremaster muscle. And so when a testes having human goes into cold water, that cremaster muscle will automatically, as a reflex, lift the testicles away from the cold water and towards the warmth of the abdomen. So that kind of retraction of testicles is the cremaster reflex. And so on some level, we're getting some outside stimuli, and then we have a muscle reacting. So read about the, and then so we're going to talk about the plantar reflex mostly, and Babinski's sign. And I have a picture I can show you about that, and you can read about it in your lab book. So here's kind of a picture of the plantar reflex, and it shows you at the top kind of what a normal reflex is, and then what a Babinski's sign is. And this is a cute little picture of a baby foot with a normal plantar reflex, or a normal, it's not being stimulated right here. And then in this picture, we're giving the stimulation on the sole of the foot, and we get this splayed out effect of the toes, rather than a curling and down of the toes that is protective. This is the normal adult reflex. This happens in babies. And so I've posed a couple questions. Why is this happening in babies? Why is it different than a full-grown adult? And what about their nervous system is occurring as you develop and mature that would generate the healthful adult reflex instead of the abnormal Babinski sign? All right, then we move on to autonomic reflexes. So all the autonomic reflexes in your lab I've color-coded yellow. So you're going to have, so remember, these are the ones that are involuntary and involve smooth muscle and the involuntary muscle of your body, and that would talk to glands and stuff. So there's a pupillary reflex, and there's a video here that shows you the pupillary reflex and what's happening there. Pretty straightforward. And then it has you answer some questions about it. It asks you to think about or to identify when you shine a flashlight in somebody's eyes and they react, is it a sympathetic nervous system reaction or a parasympathetic nervous system reaction? So I remind you, sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight nervous system, the one that helps you run away from the lion. Parasympathetic is your rest and digest nervous system, the one that calms you down after eating a meal and kind of reduces your stimuli so you can digest and kind of slows the processes down. And so you have to decide which one. And then what is the function of this pupillary response? Think about what's happening up here. Think about which nervous system is responding, and then why would it be doing that? Salivary reflex is another reflex, autonomic reflex. And this one, we're giving you some student data. So there's all the red is student data. So you have to kind of, this is what you would have been collecting in class. You would have been putting lemon juice on your tongue and spitting in little tubes. It's pretty fun. And so you have to kind of interpret this data to answer the following questions. And then it asks you if it's part of a negative feedback loop or a positive feedback loop. And so in that, I just kind of want you to think about, does the gland keep responding? Is it just a positive feedback loop where it just goes up and up and up? Or does it respond for a little while and then shut off when conditions return to normal? So kind of be thinking about that. All right, and then we move on to page 5 of your lab. And so there's this big table where we're going to look at some other autonomic reflexes. And so there are 4 here: micturition, the Herring-Brewer reflex, the defecation reflex, and the reflex that's happening in your carotid sinus. And so at the top, they've identified the reflex for you. They want to know what organ is involved. So where is it happening in the body? And then which receptors are stimulated? So what causes the reflex? What is the input stimuli? And you can look in your lab manual in exercise 22, actually, on page 346, there is a little chart that talks about different receptor types. And so that might be helpful here. And then action of the effector. What does the organ or muscle do after being stimulated? What is the effect of this reflex? And so I have indicated some page numbers in your textbook where you can find information about these specific tests or reflexes. And then the carotid sinus I did as an example for you so you could kind of see. So remember, your carotid artery, so your common carotid goes up your neck, and then it splits right at your mandible, basically, right by your ear, into the external carotid that goes to your face, and the internal carotid that goes to your brain. And right at that Y, right at that branch point, there is a sinus, or a big open kind of space. And there are some pressure receptors in that space that notice your blood pressure. And so when a reflex has been activated, the smooth muscles of those arteries are going to relax. And that means that your blood pressure will decrease and your heart rate will decrease. And so that is the reflex we're talking about. We get a stimulus from the blood pressure receptors, from the baroreceptors, and then we have an effector muscle, the smooth muscle of your blood vessels, reacting to that stimulus or reacting to that information somehow. And so I want you to fill out the rest of the table for micturition, Herring-Brewer, and defecation. All right, and then at the bottom, there's just some review, kind of understanding which reflexes go with autonomic and which ones go with somatic. Pretty straightforward. Then we move on to general sensation. So now we are into exercise 22, and that is lab manual 343 to 348. Again, a very short chapter. And so here we're going to be talking more about receptors. So you have interoreceptors and exteroreceptors. You know, internal, think inside the body. You'll be finding all this stuff kind of at the beginning parts of the chapter. Exteroreceptor, you know, external, close to the surface, interacting with the external world. And there's 2 major types or systems of exteroreceptors. And so I just kind of indicated to you that there should be 2 things there. Then there's a big table. And so it lists a bunch of activities or sensations. And so you just have to decide, is this using exteroreceptors or is this using interoreceptors? And then what kind of specific receptor types are this? And then we're back to our handy little table on page 346 of our lab manual that kind of talks about both the stimulus type, pressure, heat, cold, and the structural class of the receptor, baroreceptor, Pacinian corpuscle, that kind of stuff. I would be aware of both of those types or names for the receptor, the stimulus type and the structural class. So you're going down, you just have to kind of decide, is it like more of an internal organ thing or a surface receptor thing? And then there's one special case, seasickness. This is kind of a unique one. And so I'm just posing a question here. You know, seasickness makes you nausea, it gives you nausea, it makes you throw up over the side of the boat, right? And so it can be easy to think that nausea comes from your stomach. So that's a viscera, it's an organ, that must be an interoreceptor. So I just want you to think about, is that really where the origin of seasickness is coming from? What about when you're car sick, or if you get sick on the ride at the fair? You know, what sensory input is the cause of that? Is sensory input the cause? Or is it really your stomach giving you information? So think about that. Give me your best answer for that. So pretty straightforward, right? All right, so this is the part of your exercise 22 where you're going to be kind of watching the videos about the 2 different tests, right? So they're right here. They're both under a minute and a half, very quick, very basic, and just tells you what the test is. We would be doing these on each other in the class if we were in person. And so there is a 2-point discrimination test. And here we have given you the student data that you would have identified when you were doing these on each other in the class. So you have to interpret this data. And so I ask you, once you watch the video about the 2-point discrimination test, if I can tell that the 2 points are very close, what does that mean with regard to receptors in my skin? Would this be indicated by low numbers to the left, meaning these, or high numbers to the left? So I want you to kind of interpret this data. And then testing tactile localization. This is just another test. Watch the video for it. It's basically you're going to close your eyes, you're going to get pricked with a pin, and then you're going to have to identify where you got pricked. Very easy. So how close did the pin prick get to the pin prick? So if I touch your arm or your hand or something with a pin and your eyes are closed, and then I ask you to go touch the place that I touched, how close does the person get? And if they got very close or were not very close, what does that indicate? And so how do these questions get answered? By interpreting this number data right here. That's pretty much the 2-point discrimination test. Then the last page of your lab is pretty much just asking you some questions about general sensations and receptors, cutaneous receptors, where are we most sensitive, where are we least sensitive. Then there's a question about referred pain. And so we've all experienced this before. You can look in your lab manual, page 348, but also your textbook, page 496, has a really great picture of referred pain. And I also have a diagram I will show you. And so your textbook gives you a nice explanation for why referred pain exists. And then the figure can help you kind of understand this question. Then we have to kind of figure out what part of your brain deals with cutaneous sensations. So you might want to review some of your brain stuff. Or think about your body sensation. That's what we're talking about when we talk about cutaneous. Nervous receptors in your body on some level, and they're not motor, right? So the input sensation means an input, means an arriving afferent sensory signal. So think about what part of your brain processes arriving sensory signals. And then define adaptation. And so I want you to think about adaptation in reference to nerve endings and general sensation. And here's my little imagine. Imagine you have a job at a sewage treatment plant, and after, 6 months of working there, you kind of realize that you don't smell the smell anymore. Would there be a benefit to your olfactory nerves adapting to that odor? And then if so, what does that mean? What's going on if you get used to the smell? That's kind of what I want you to think about there. And then some more questions about adapting and about why we have nerve endings. Why is it important to be able to feel pain? What would happen if we couldn't feel pain? And what would happen if we just didn't have any nerve endings on our surface? So that's pretty much it. So you have one in the book too on page 496, but I've included a referred pain diagram for you. So on some level, I pose a question here. Why would stimuli from our internal organs cause pain for the body muscles? And so I want you to think about how our internal organs, like your kidneys, make you hurt. If your kidneys are in pain, this entire yellow area of your body will hurt. Why is that? Why are all of these muscles affected by pain in your kidneys? So I want you to kind of try to ponder that question. And that is your exercise 21 and 22 lab for this week. Thank you very much.